Thanks for sharing about your fear. One other point to make here, the autocratic or anarchist worldview sees obedience as the basis of what is right and rebellion as what is wrong. Loyalty in Type 1 communities is a commitment based on what you have to do, not what you ought to do or want to do. Subjects in Type 1 communities do not have good alternatives other than to obey what is expected of them by those in authority. History has shown that Type 1 communities are not considered virtuous because of the abuse subjects take, and Type 1 communities do not prosper across time because the efforts of the subjects is low. The second exchange-oriented worldview uses justice, not fear, as the basis for government. We will refer to this as Type 2, or win-win. In Type 2 communities, authorities and subjects mutually gain in a balanced and fair manner. This is characteristic of benevolent dictators or democratic republics where power is given to the constitutional law and not exercised at the discretion of the individuals in authority. This protects the rights of all members of the community to be treated justly. Type 2 communities prosper more than Type 1 because efforts of the subjects is greater. Studies show that performance increases within these communities because subjects trust that they will be rewarded fairly, or because subjects seek to avoid guilt and shame from failing the community. In a balanced exchange-oriented community, effort is reduced when either party believes that they are giving more than they are receiving, or no longer feel obligated because their rewards are less than promised. Justice, or getting what you deserve, is the basis for what is right, and injustice is wrong. In Type 2 communities, loyalty is based on duty, and is often an I ought to commitment, not an I have to commitment in Type 1. While justice is more virtuous and produces more abundantly than Type 1 power-greed approaches to community, there is one problem with justice as a virtue. Justice is equity, an equal exchange of giving and receiving. What does a community do with those who cannot participate in exchange? Should they not receive benefits because they're not capable of giving? Is it not more virtuous for communities to provide resources so everyone receives the same, regardless of what they contribute, distributing goods based on the needs of the community? Without losing the motivation of equity, justice systems need accommodations for those who are vulnerable, such as widows, orphans, the handicapped, those who cannot participate in the performance-based exchange, like the majority of subjects. One point we need to make about Type 2 communities. The current focus on social justice has warped the meaning of the word deserve, which is key to justice. Accommodating people who cannot or will not contribute becomes a problem in Type 2 communities when subjects are influenced by a sense of entitlement. If subjects believe that they deserve benefits from the community without giving back in exchange, then they really believe that their exchange requirements is zero or nothing. This worldview of justice can eventually destroy a community because everyone will expect something from the community, but no one will see the need to contribute. We have seen that Type 2 is generally more abundant and virtuous than Type 1 communities, but Type 2 communities can limit how a person prospers. This constraint on output happens when members of the community give only up to a point of being equal to what they receive. There is human potential that may be left unused because there is no incentive that motivates people to contribute at even greater levels without the prospects of being rewarded more. There's one other point about Type 1 and Type 2 communities that we need to emphasize. Accumulating power is more important in exchange-based communities because those with power get to control how benefits are distributed. The theme of Tolkien's famous trilogy and my personal favorite book, The Lord of the Rings, is the contaminating influence of power. Tolkien suggests that the real heroes are those who refuse the ring of power, so to speak. The irony is that by doing so, they ultimately receive the power that serves others and not themselves. This suggests a third type of community that does not use exchange as a basis for behavior, but a power that produces selfless service. A Type 3 community is defined as a servant model where people do not depend on the value that passes between them to prosper in their relationships with each other. A servant-oriented community starts with those in power who are committed to serving those under their authority. By selflessly giving to the members of the community, the greater community benefits. Unlike the first two worldviews of power, giving is discretionary or voluntary, and not reciprocal, and not an obligation. Let me repeat that again. Unlike the first two worldviews of power, giving is discretionary, not reciprocal. This reward system is not self-serving, but other-serving, and is the ultimate virtue based on grace or undeserved kindness. Members of the community do not seek their rights, do not desire to take advantage of others, do not seek personal gain, or the need to satisfy guilt or keep the peace. Rather, behavior of the subjects of the community is a response to the gracious character of the one who has power. The hearts of those under the authority are filled with affection for the authority, resulting in hope, freedom, and thankfulness, and a willingness to serve. Loyalty in Type 3 communities is an I want to commitment based on admiration and respect, not an I have to based on obedience, or an I ought to based on duty or obligation. The underprivileged are served not from a sense of justice, but from everyone's sense of thanksgiving. Let's take a moment and reflect back on these three types of communities. Type 1 is autocratic, using lawless power and fear to govern. Type 2 governs with contingent reward systems, which keeps people in a relationship through a balanced structure of giving and receiving. And then Type 3 produces willful acts of service based on the undeserved kindness that is granted to the subjects by those in power, and then subsequently by the subjects to each other.